It's time for us to write code to determine if the game is won or lost. This means that while we're tapping on numbers, we want to calculate the sum of the selected numbers. This sum is going to affect the game status. The game status can be one of three values. It can be the currently playing game status, or it could be won, or it could be lost. The thing is, this game status can be computed. So we don't really need to put it on the state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new function here and call it game status. And the goal of this function is to compute the game status at any point. So the first thing that we need is the sum of selected number. Let's put that in a variable, call that sum selected. We can compute the sum of selected numbers from the selected IDs that we put on the state. Because every time we select a number here, we place its index ID on the state. In fact, this selected number's name might be a bit misleading. We're not placing the actual numbers on the state. We're placing the positional order of each number, which we're using as the ID of that number. So I'm going to actually rename this selected numbers state everywhere into selected IDs instead. I think that makes it a little bit more clear that we are selecting the IDs of these numbers so that when we want to compute the sum of selected numbers, we start from this .state.selected IDs, and then we want to reduce this array into a sum of the selected numbers that maps to these selected IDs. So let's do that. We reduce. Reduce is going to give us an accumulator and the current ID. And we want to start this from 0. And every time we want to return the accumulator plus the number that maps to the current index. And we can read that from this .random numbers for the current index. And that should do the trick. In fact, that's something we should test right away. So let me console log sum selected. And for testing of this, let me just invoke game status every time we render. Because every time we select a number, we are going to render that view. Now, by the way, console.log is not going to show up here, right? Every time we select something, the console.log is not going to show up here. You have to look at it here. So we start with 0, 2. Then I'm going to select 10. And now my sum is 12, 3, 15. So this seems to be working great. If you want feedback right here in the simulator, you can actually use console.warn. And if you do that, you would get the warning right here. So we start with 0. Now it's 8, 18, 26. So with console.warn, you get immediate feedback here. You don't have to look at the debugger. But I do prefer using log instead and always looking at the debugger. Okay, we have the selected sum, which means we can use this value to actually determine the game status. Because it's one of simple 3 cases. When the sum selected is less than the target, which is this .target, you can still play. So I'm going to return playing. When the selected sum is exactly equal to the target, then the game has been won. So I'm going to return 1. Otherwise, if we hit this point, the game is lost. But we can actually document this with an if statement as well. So if sum selected is greater than this target, again, this if statement is completely optional because that is the case, then we need to return lost. And I don't need to use else statements here because I'm just returning from the function. So every successful if statement is going to short circuit everything else. So now I can capture this game status. Let's do that. And we can simply display it in a text here just for testing. So I'm going to do exactly that. Text and render the game status and test that. So the game status is playing. If I click 17, 10, 2 plus 5, I'm still playing. When I hit 5, I won the game. And if you lose the game, you get lost the game. Okay, so the game status is working okay for now. Of course, I still have a lot of edge cases to fix. For example, if I win the game, I can also lose the game. So I need to fix that edge case. But before we do that, let's make the UI respect the computed game status.